inclusive themselves in working with rights holders directly. So we have the honor and the pleasure of Yasaiki Mai, who's sitting next to Johanna, who was stateless before and now has the basic right, I would say. I was going to say luxury, but it's a basic right of having a document. And you are from the Nubian Rights Forum and will share us a little bit about your journey. Then on his right, we have Khalid, who is from Dignity Kwanza in Tanzania, who is a co-implementing partner. And then we have Dinah from the Kenyan Human Rights Commission, who's also a co-implementing partner. And together they are here, not only because we are here, it's actually a secondary objective, but because there is a conference in Den Haag on statelessness. And so we thought it was a great addition to enrich us with some of the issues around statelessness and how we contribute this globally. So without further ado, welcome. And once again, and Johanna, do I give the word to you?
Thank you everyone for welcoming us. We're happy to be here. And we'll start with a small exercise. I'll hand over to Diana.
Okay.
Good morning, everyone. I'll start now. We want to get to know you. We've been introduced very, very well, but we don't know all of you. So in the introduction, we want to know your name, the country you're from, okay? Then in your first language, what is statelessness? In your first language. Your very original language. Tell us what is statelessness in that language. So you can say, I am a Dinka, and in my language, statelessness is, so that we are able to capture it, okay? So we'll do the introduction. Let's start with Thomas. Then, yes, you want to help? Get us what they say.
So, my name is Tomás. I am from Venezuela. My native language is Spanish. And in Spanish, statelessness does not have a word to it, but we call it, the people that is stateless, we call them apátridas. Like without a nation.
Okay, without a nation.
My name is Rui. I'm from the Philippines. My first language is Filipino, and stateless in Filipino is walang bansa. No country.
No country.
I am Zach. I'm also from the Philippines. The same for me.
Okay. Yeah, so we get used to this term.
Oh, sorry. Okay, I have to say it again. Walang bansa.
Hi, my name is Tina. I'm one of the evaluation officers. And this is interesting because in my language there's also no legal term. Where are you from? There's no legal term. So in Greek, we also have something that is where torture comes from. It's choris katolika, which is without a country.
Without a country. Okay. Wow. Who are these without a country? Christine?
It's a combination of words.
Okay, so there's no single one.
Yes, there's a combination of words. Somebody is looking for where to look his head or her head. That's that.
Okay, okay. That's Buganda. Okay.
Hi, my name is Chris. I'm from the Netherlands. I'm in the luxury position. And the word in Dutch is, I don't know, fabulous, and in Portuguese is apa.
Okay. Okay. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Edwin. I'm from the Netherlands, and in Dutch it's stateless. So that's pretty similar to the English.
Okay, stateless.
Stateless, stateless.
Okay. Thank you.
Hi everyone. So, my name is
Ouch. compare notes. Your grandmother is not here.
Yeah, so my name is Dusuba, and so like Inez, I have the luxury to have actually 3 citizenship. So yeah, Malawi, France, and Canada. So I'm going to go with the French word, apartheid. I know that I have my Malian brother as well, living in Rwanda as well.
Okay.
Apartheid.
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 Yes, and Mano from Tanzania. In Tanzania we say kutokuwa na uraia. Kutokuwa na uraia, but yeah, in Swahili, but there's a lot of words in Swahili, so that yeah. So for me, kutokuwa na uraia. Kukosa uraia.
Yes, but yes.
I'm called Daisy. I'm from Uganda, and in my first language, it's Christine. I'm an only Buddha.
Abanyalomi wa Muguda. That one, okay? A very long one. Yeah. If you notice, even statelessness, landlessness, it's not a word. It's not a single word.
Hi, I'm Anna from Mexico, and is this name of particular?
Okay.
Hi, I'm Hadiza from Niger.
Sorry.
Hadiza from Niger.
Just a second. Explain it in your language and then in English how you can define it.
Apatria is without a country, yeah, in Spanish language. Yeah, the same.
Yes, I was saying I'm Hadiza from Niger, Songhai, same like them, and we said Keyo.
Keyo. What does that mean?
The same.
Stateless, exactly stateless. It defines.
Well, I don't think we have it exactly the way.
What does that word
yeah,
just
it's
mention?
close to like someone, like close to a stranger.
Okay, stranger. Okay.
Hi, my name is Ruth from Kenya. Let me think of the Swahili.
The Swahili has been mentioned.
So let's say
I
Sheng.
know, for you, I know it's not your first language.
So in Sheng, it's Bilastic.
I'll subject you to a second introduction later because Sheng is a very recent language. Yes.
Hi, I'm Arisa. I'm from the Philippines. So same as Zach and Lee, it's walang bansa, which means literally no country.
Okay.
I'm Alex. I'm from Germany. I'm from Laos. And my first language is German, and it's similar to English and Dutch. Staatslosigkeit, one word, Staatslosigkeit. Statelessness, Staatslosigkeit is the same.
Okay.
And in Laos, I think my colleagues then I think like people that don't have the state maybe, but maybe they can explain.
Stranger. Okay.
My name is Sekou. I'm from Mali. In our language we say Dubutan.
Dubutan. Okay, what does that mean?
No country.
No country. Okay.
And which language is Bambara?
Bambara, yeah, it is Bambara.
Okay. Thank you.
Hi everyone.
Hi.
My name is Ramata
the same thing, no country. Okay, okay. I want to find out for how long you guys had countries and states.
Hello, my name is Omar Mukhtar. I come from Nigeria. In my language, Hausa, I'm from Hausa tribe. We say Rishin Kauna. Rishin Kauna.
Meaning?
Statelessness. I'm from Uganda. In my language, we don't have the word stateless. But people are not from the same community and do not know where they belong. You say Japan.
Japan. Okay, so you don't know where you belong. Okay. Stranded.
My name is Sebastian from Nigeria, the central part of Nigeria, and we refer to somebody like that as, in my native dialect, as Miza. Miza, meaning like stranger. In Hausa,
stranger.
My name is Clemens. I'm from the Netherlands, so we're going to start on low side.
Okay.
Similar to the States. That's one word.
My name is Rina from Kenya. My first language, trying to do
I have no idea. There's no, that word doesn't exist.
What is your first language?
But what I'm trying to think of.
What's your first language? Luo. Okay. So Luo, that word does not exist.
My name is Ryan from Laos. I would say, in my local language, we would say, that means, that literally means you don't have a country that you belong to.
Okay. You don't have a country
that you belong to.
Laos.
Lao, L-A-O.
Okay, my name is Manuan. I'm from Laos, same address.
Okay.
Konfumi Pradesh, you the same.
The very same. Okay. Thank you.
My name is Stranka from Nigeria. I look like people, but I've been trying to think of how to, I would say, Oyene Onwenye Obodo.
Oyene Onwenye Obodo.
Oyene Onwenye Obodo. Kind of someone who doesn't have the same.
Okay. Okay, but you're translating it.
Yes.
But the word doesn't exist.
It might, but it's possible that I don't know it.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm Jimmy from Uganda. We don't have a specific word, but what I know is taking on, take logo. Take logo means doesn't have a class.
You say it's landless.
No, we speak different. It's true.
What language is that?
I speak Acholi, but I speak Acholi.
Japadola.
He speaks
Japadola. Very different. Very different from ours.
Okay.
No, it's a language.
Yeah. Actually.
Yes.
Actually, and your Luo.
Japadola.
These are more languages. The one that Rena speaks, and Wendy, and Jimmy, and I. These are all Luo dialects.
Okay.
Certain words
No,
we
no.
understand one
Where I come from, I understand the Luo, so I will leave it at Acholi Luo.
Hello, I'm Lily. I'm from Indonesia. I'm not sure we have a specific word for that, but I will translate it to tidak bernegara.
Tidak Okay.
Maybe there is a specific.
Write it as we hear it. Okay, and then it means without country. Without country. Okay, without a country. Yes.
Hi, I'm Boran from Cambodia. We speak Khmer, and we don't have specific word for that, but we call it Mekhrin Protect, like no country.
Okay.
Hi, I'm Chika from Indonesia. I usually read in news media, they describe it tanpa dokumen, without document.
Wow.
I am Sukha from Cambodia. Yeah, in Khmer we can translate Neptune Protection. Then Boran most mean no without country.
Without country.
Hi, I'm Fatuma from Kenya. My first language is Swahili, but Swahili in Kenya is different from Swahili in Tanzania. I don't think we have a word in our Swahili to describe that. Yeah. So I think even to attempt to describe it, you have to use a paragraph. Yeah.
Okay.
Who doesn't have who's not Kenya, who was like just away from the country or not, you have to read it.
Okay.
Sheila Muli from Kenya. My name is Kwanza.
So there are people from this exercise we realize, and this is useful because this is more of a global context. For people whose first languages are Spanish, German, English, French, Dutch, you can immediately translate it. Okay, there's a close linkage, and this particular, as you'll see in the presentation, they interacted with this phenomenon during the First and Second World War. They were already nations, but in most of the Asia, the Latin American, and Africa, this is a foreign concept, as in not foreign, it is an unheard of. What is this? What are you speaking about? And even if this was a meeting of government officials, they would share the same sentiment, maybe just adopt what she has said without documents. Sometimes they will infuse things like they're migrants, but if you think about just people who are in your space and you don't know where they belong, you can't touch it. Okay? So the next two, we now have maybe 1 hour, 40 minutes. We will be having this conversation to see if we can somehow understand who is a stateless person, what's the distinction between a migrant and a stateless person, is there a distinction between a stateless person and a refugee, and so on. So that's what we'll be running with, okay? So to get there, when I introduce myself in Search for Us, like back home, I'll have my wallet, and I compare my wallet to my grandmother's wallet. My grandmother would have a wallet issued by the mobile telecommunication network. Yeah, they have a small wallet where you put your SIM card. So her wallet only has an ID. That's all she is. Okay. Then if she's in a public forum, she'll then introduce herself as the mother of many children. But she has her ID. If I stand up, I'll introduce myself as Diana. I will remove my bar association ID, my arbitrator ID. I will remove very many things. They are all part of my identity. And in this room, if we hadn't restricted and we tell you to describe yourself, you would tell us very many things. It will include your academic titles, your work, they are all part of your identity, okay? So identity, you determine it yourself. And this is voice, so you interact with the very marginalized people who feel a part of their identity is not properly recognized. be it gender and sexual minority, indigenous communities. So your identity is self-determined. But nationality is linked to your identity, but that is legally determined. And therefore, nationality is the link between an individual and a state or a country. When we all attempted to do the interpretation, it is how we are linked to a certain country. So somehow, all of us on this earth must be owned by a country for us to be deemed to properly exist. Okay? As you move around, every time you're passing through immigration, they stamp you. And you feel proudly, I am a Kenyan. I am a, okay? You're stamped. Whenever they conduct a census, they attend the UN, the UNGAs and everything. States claim their own people, who they recognize as citizens. And that particular linkage gives you we say it's the mother of all rights. If you're not a citizen, you have no rights. If you're a refugee, you're still a citizen who is seeking asylum. So you still have rights. But if you're not a citizen, on this one, you are not, you have no rights, nobody is responsible for you. And in our interaction with stateless people, for example, in Kenya, one of them say, we are born and die without a record that we ever existed. Okay? They do not even get things like a birth certificate or a death certificate. So you live and die, you are never on this world. Okay? They are like shadows. Sometimes you can even count shadows when you're walking around. So we must recognize nationality. She has 3. Okay? She has 3. That's like, yeah, she has 2. Don't feel victimized. It's a very good thing. It's a very good thing to have dual nationality or even multiple nationality and even be able to assert. But there are people who cannot even lay a claim to one single nationality. Okay? So from here, let me move to how you acquire nationality. And maybe now I come to you. How did you get 3 nationalities?
So I was born in France, born and raised there. Well, my first nationality is Malian, because my parents are Malian. Then I was born and raised in France, so I acquired a French nationality. And then I lived in Canada for 12 years.
Okay.
So again, I lived in the US.
So the French and the Canadian nationality is linked to a territory.
Yeah.
You have lived there. Okay? Most of us acquire nationality, which is called nationality of origin, mainly by, sometimes you can say by blood or by relation. Okay? So most countries will have nationality by descent, where it is your parent who passes their nationality to you somehow. That particular nationality, in most cases, you can never lose it. It is a nationality of origin. However, there are countries like like America, where you're just by being born on the territory, you have nationality of origin. You're a citizen by birth. Okay? I'm not very sure about, say, the Philippines, Indonesia, but in Africa, most of the countries, nationality is by descent. You're a citizen because your parents were citizens when you're born. And most of the world, actually, very few countries just give citizenship by being born on their territory. And anyway, Trump is actually reforming that. So those are some of the linkages. So by blood, By marriage, if you're married to somebody, then the marriage subsists for a certain period, you can apply to be naturalized. Okay? Then the second one, so that's marriage, residence, then by birth, which is often by descent. So those are the primary ways of how you get your linkage to a state and your nationality. Have that at the back of your mind, so that as we discuss stateless people, we want to find out, haven't they ever lived somewhere? Are they related to anybody? Don't they marry? You know, those types of questions. How exactly did they end up being stateless? Okay? Now, what is statelessness? This verbose word. I don't know. That's the big definition. It's found in the 1954 UN Convention on Prevention of Statelessness, just around the same time when we were passing the Refugee Convention. And they say a stateless person is somebody who is not recognized as a national of any state. Okay? When you interact with stateless people, and you will see them in the films and everything, this word disgusts them. Like who came up with this word? Why did this even have to be formulated? Why are we called stateless? You know, when you pronounce it, especially if you have very good diction, statelessness, it sounds very nice. Okay? But that word is heaped with all the violations in this world that you can ever imagine of. Because if it means, I don't know whether you people work on things like extrajudicial killings and forced disappearances. If somebody is killed and there's a record, you can pursue. Stateless people will die and they never existed. So it doesn't mean anything. And luckily I have explained how we get the connection, whether it is nationality of origin or it's attributed nationality by naturalization, whether by marriage or long residence in a particular place. Most of the times, you will realize that countries have a way of showing you're a Kenyan national, you're an Indonesian, you're a Philippine, all Philippines. Okay. That's the Bible. You're a Filipino, yes. So for some people know from the onset that they are stateless. Why? Because some countries, when you're born, your birth certificate already has your nationality. Okay? Is that correct? Yes. When you're born, your birth certificate has your nationality. If you're registered. Okay, so birth registration becomes very important in certain countries. But in other countries, whether you're registered at birth or not, birth registration is just an occurrence of birth. Okay? That's the case for most common law jurisdiction. Birth registration just shows you are born. Okay? But most of the Scandinavian and civil law jurisdiction, then they will record birth registration and indicate your nationality at that point. So from the get-go, you know whether you're stateless, whether you have queries or not. In these countries where this particular project is anchored, they are all common law countries. So people live on until the day there are certain questions that are raised. Yes?
What about countries that have not been officially recognized? I'm thinking about Palestine, think about Taiwan, Tibet, where Tibetans actually don't want to be Chinese.
Yeah.
They might actually be purposefully stealing.
So where in countries that are not recognized, say, no, Somali at least is, Somali is just unstable, but it is recognized. Nobody is contesting. The Palestine in Africa, it would be the Morocco and Sahrawi, nation. So when that happens, you guys recognize yourself as members of, say, the Palestine state, but that is contested in another space. Okay? You will never be able to access documentation of, say, Israel. Palestine would want to give you a document, but you're not recognized. So that's more of an evolving, one of the areas that's still evolving around statelessness, because you can't say they didn't choose not to be recognized. Palestine would recognize them, but the world has chosen not to recognize them. Whenever they are in situations of refugees, then they are both refugees and stateless, because they have no documents to lay a claim to Israel, which is properly recognized, and then the documents from Palestine also don't recognize them. But they also fall within the category of risk of statelessness. Because should Palestine never become a state, then they will have very huge challenges trying to prove their Israeli nationality. So that's an evolving area, but luckily in the conference, there's a whole session discussing exactly those questions that you have raised, because it's still an evolving area. Because of how vague statelessness is, there are no tangible figures. In 2015, the UNHCR launched the Global Action Plan on ending statelessness within 10 years. At that time, they put the figures at 10 million, over 10 million. In Africa, the known numbers were, at least Ivory Coast had over 800,000. Okay? Kenya back then, there were two contradicting figures of 100,000 and 20,000. That's a huge contradiction in terms of figures. Ever since that time, that figure has never gone down, and so far the UNHCR has only been able to document people who know and are recognized as stateless only at 3.9. During this period, countries like Sudan and South Sudan have had their secession. There is a community, there are very many people and communities who cannot fall properly within Sudan or South Sudan. During that period again in Africa, for example, the Bakassi area has had contestation, okay, between Nigeria and Cameroon. There are people who are lost in between. The Great Lakes region has seen a very high number of people who cannot be recognized as either being members of the DRC, the Central African Republic, or the Congo. Okay? So the numbers are increasing, but during this period as well, we have seen globally a push, particularly in the developing regions, for governments to issue IDs, birth certificate. So during this time is when they are realizing there are certain people who cannot fall within the boxes of our laws. So the figures will always be very problematic. I have spoken about some of the causes of statelessness, and they are legal and administrative ones. The first legal one, I would put it the fact that you either acquire nationality by blood relation or by residence. Okay? whenever there is a conflict between those two laws, for instance, you're born, for the longest time, Japan, it's on the territory. You're a Japanese if you're born in Japan. Is that correct?
Not really. I'm also half Japanese.
Okay.
But the thing is, your parents, your Japanese parents should legally recognize you as part of the family. So, because I'm half Japanese, my father is Japanese, but my father didn't recognize me, so I cannot claim the Japanese.
So they must recognize you legally through a certain process.
a certain procedure that they have to file a case with the court, that I am his daughter.
Because
so he has
you are
to
born outside Japan.
Yes.
But if you're born inside, then
that also doesn't apply. So the Japanese parents should legally recognize the child as their own.
Go for one, because it's quite obvious who you're born from. But
If you're not fully, maybe, yeah.
I think as Gaijin, you can get a Japanese passport if you're foreigners and you have children born in Japan. They don't get.
They don't automatically get it.
It's very hard to get a Japanese.
Japanese. Okay. So let me use these two examples. Okay, it might be slightly not really. America and Kenya. Americans come to Kenya, they deliver in Nairobi. Okay? You're an American citizen if you're born in US. In the US. Okay? So they are born in, they have a child in Kenya. You're a Kenyan citizen if at the time of your birth, either one of your parents is a Kenyan citizen. So that child cannot be recognized in Kenya and is not recognized in America. Okay? So there's a conflict of laws. Then you fall in between the cracks and you're stateless.
But in America, even if you were born outside of America,
you can apply.
You can apply
For you, okay? But in the meantime, before they apply, at that point you're stateless, okay? And some countries, say like Japan, it might be, there's what you're explaining, but I know Japan has serious problems of how you claim your citizenship. But closer home, this conflict also applies, like in 1981, Britain passed a law. In all their colonies, they were British overseas citizens. Okay, so people who chose that I will remain in a former British colony, but I still have my British nationality. So they were called British overseas citizens. But there were so many of them across the world, so finally they decided we are not recognizing anyone anymore. So they passed a law that any child born of a British overseas citizen will no longer be recognized. Is not a British citizen. Okay? So like in East Africa, there were very many such people. So their children cannot get the citizenship of the countries where their parents live, okay? And they cannot get British citizen. So they fall in between and they are stateless.
So if you don't get the citizenship of your parents, de facto, like automatically, that's not the case.
Yeah. For British overseas citizens. Yeah. There has been a case that was brought to the court here. They just dropped the tag British overseas citizen. They call them British citizen, but still in their laws, as long as you're living abroad, then you can't, for a certain period, you can't pass citizenship. So that becomes a challenge. Then there is also the problem of, particularly in Africa, we all adopted nationality laws of our former colonies. Okay? So when those were adopted, certain specificities were not considered. Okay? So we wrote everything. These are people who had already started birth registration. They had some form of national identification. In African colonies, national identity cards were used for labor regulation. Okay? So only the fit people would be registered. For instance, in Kenya, women never had IDs because they were not considered laborers in that particular setting. But the law was inherited and just adopted minimally to respond to that. Most of the time, they would then decide who is indigenous without a proper research. So most of the minority groups were never factored as part of the indigenous communities. When that happened, then these minority groups, the registration departments of various countries were formed, and they had a code, an ethnic code. So in Uganda, they have an ethnic code that is in their constitution. In Kenya, we have an ethnic code that is somewhere, but it has a list of 42 communities. If you're not within that community, you're not considered an indigenous. Kenyan and indigenous, Ugandan, Tanzania has something similar. It's not, Uganda is the only one that has it in the constitution. In Kenya and Tanzania, it's hidden somewhere. But it's an indigeneity test. Okay? If you do not fall in, then you have to prove that you are there. How do you prove? You need to show documents. At a time when there were no documents. So that also becomes a big problem. Then there is the 1961 Convention, because globally we all want to protect children. When I give the examples of children, I would say, oh my God, that's very possible. Especially for those of us who work, we are not in our countries of origin, we would be worried. So there is a provision on foundling. So a foundling is a child who is found on a certain territory, but who is considered, who cannot lay a claim to any country. Okay? And most of the time, there will be an additional rider that the parents are not known. That's called a foundling. So for foundlings, then most countries agree, if we find a foundling, we should give them national citizenship out of best interest of the child, a lot of empathy. It just follows, okay? But that the definition of foundling, you're found in a certain territory, you have no parents. What of children found in territory, but their children cannot pass nationality? That becomes a problem. Then the other challenge is, another cause is the fact that whenever, in most countries, they naturalize the parent, but do not naturalize the children. So the children will have to go through their own process of naturalization. So that leaves behind an entire generation of stateless descendants if parents are not able to pass nationality. Then there is just loss of nationality or deprivation. Deprivation is where you knew you were a citizen of the Netherlands, then the Dutch government wakes up one day and just withdraws your citizenship. In most cases, you can be deprived of your acquired or attributed nationality. So where you are naturalized. That nationality can be deprived. One, most of the time, if it was acquired by fraud, or if you're engaged in war with that particular country and you're seen as their opponent, most of the time they will deprive you. Those are legal grounds. But in this era of shrinking civic space, countries have just decided we can deprive you of your nationality as the best way of silencing you. Okay? So we have had instances in Burundi where a vice chair of the Law Society of Kenya, or of Burundi there, the Bar Association, was deprived of their nationality. There is a case in Tanzania of an activist.
Niger, Baba Alpha.
Exactly, Zambia. You remember the president himself, Kaunda. Kenya, Biguna. These are people who are nationals by birth. Biguna was lucky, he had Canadian citizenship, so he didn't end up being stateless. But the other people would have easily become stateless. So most of the time, deprivation is very linked to political causes, and currently it's linked to shrinking civic space. I have explained a bit on state succession, and my favorite example is Sudan and South Sudan. The Falatas are caught right there in the middle, and then right now there's a question of people who left as Sudanese refugees. Okay? They can't, so they have always gotten protection on the basis they were Sudanese refugees. But after the secession, they are now South Sudan. So they would need to come and regularize. Before they do that, then Sudan no longer recognizes them. So that limbo can be a cause of statelessness, and so on. Let me quickly move to the administrative causes. Administrative causes are what we live with. They are our usual biases. Okay? I am the registrar who is supposed to issue national identity cards to everybody. I decide certain people are not good enough to be the voice, so I will not issue them with badges. They continue accessing the room. Then one day, you cannot become a voice national unless you have the badge. So anybody who was left out is thrown out. If you can, before you prove, and in that period where you cannot clearly prove you're a voice national, then you're either at risk of being stateless, but it can also clearly lead to statelessness, especially where the state does not have proper administrative processes. Secondly, the common law jurisdiction, not a single document, proves. The Kenyan case of Miguna. Miguna had a birth certificate, he had a national ID, he had a passport. All his documents were taken away, and he was deported as if he was not a Kenyan. So there is no document that is conclusive proof that you're a national. That's the case in Tanzania as well, where you have very many people, including journalists, they have held in up to 9 passports. When you're applying for the 10th passport, you're told you're not a Tanzanian. So the fact that there's not one document that is, say, a certificate of citizenship is a major cause of statelessness. Low birth registration is a big cost, especially for border communities, because then the government can say, we are not sure whether you were born on this side of the border or on this other side of the border. Then political biases also come in, where certain communities back home in Africa, we vote as regional or ethnic blocks. If your ethnic block is not considered national enough, then they will create administrative procedures to just vet you. In the process of that vetting, very many people are left out. And now currently, we are moving to digital identity. We are moving to that digital identity before we resolve all these problems that we currently have. If we move to digital identity before ensuring that everybody has a nationality and a proper legal identity, we are carrying that problem. The challenges of access as we move to digital identity are even bigger, and so that's another huge risk. Let me move to consequences and okay. So now we are moving to consequences of statelessness, but to do that, we will play a short video of 5 minutes. Yeah, so we are getting ready to take a short break, then we will resume in 1 minute. Be brave.